Welcome back to the Alibi Club, where every mystery is a case file waiting to be reopened. It began with two bodies found on a Brazilian hillside, dressed in identical suits, waterproof raincoats, and strange lead masks shielding their eyes. There were no signs of violence, no wounds, no poison, just a cryptic note in one man's pocket, instructions scrawled in shaky handwriting. Be at the designated place at 16:30, take capsules after the effect, protect metals, await signal. What signal? What metals? Who were they waiting for? What happened next would unravel a bizarre mystery, still unsolved to this day, one tangled in pseudoscience, spiritualism, and whispers of UFOs. Welcome to the lead masks case. It was the afternoon of August 20th, 1966, when a young boy flying a kite stumbled upon something his childhood innocence couldn't comprehend. High on the slopes of Morro do Vintém, a lush, remote hill in Niterói, Brazil, his game was interrupted by an eerie sight. Two bodies lay side by side among the thick brush, strangely calm in appearance. They wore formal suits and waterproof raincoats, like men caught between a business meeting and a storm. But it was the lead masks covering their eyes, cold, metallic and handmade, that truly startled him. The boy ran for help, not knowing he had just triggered one of Brazil's most enduring mysteries. When police arrived, the scene was almost too bizarre for belief. The men had no visible injuries. They were lying on their backs, slightly inclined, hands by their sides. There was no sign of a struggle, nor any evidence of robbery. Their belongings were untouched, a small plastic water bottle, two towels, and a notebook. But most chilling was what they wore on their faces. Thick, hand-cut lead masks, shaped to shield their eyes from something unknown. Not typical sunglasses, or welding goggles. No straps, no hinges. Just solid slabs of lead, as if they'd expected to witness something no human eye should see. The notebook held cryptic notes written in Portuguese. One translated line read, "Be at the place at 16:30. Take capsules after the effect. Protect metals. Await signal." It was signed by no one, addressed to no one, but gave the illusion of planning, ritualistic, timed, and deliberate. There was something ritualistic about the whole arrangement. The bottles, the towels, the folded raincoats. It didn't seem like a random suicide, and it certainly wasn't an accident. Investigators quickly identified the men as Manuel Pereira de Cruz and Miguel José Viana, both in their 30s, and both electronic technicians from Campos dos Goitacazes, a small city a few hours north. They were respected professionals, with no criminal history and no known mental illness. Friends and family described them as deeply interested in scientific and spiritual pursuits, sometimes veering into the fringe. They were also members of a group interested in spiritism, a movement based on the belief that the dead can communicate with the living through mediums and rituals. That detail would soon become crucial. Their journey to Niterói was methodical. On August 17th, they told their families they were going to buy work supplies, a car part perhaps, or some electronics. They wore suits and carried just enough money for a short trip, but records showed they had purchased raincoats from a local shop, and later, a bottle of water from a bar near the base of Morro do Vintém. The bartender remembered them. He thought it odd that the men were nervous and kept checking the time. They left in a hurry, climbing the hill just before 4:30 p.m., the exact time mentioned in their cryptic note. Why go up there? Why climb a secluded hill with no camping gear, no food, no weapons? Why wear lead masks? And what were the capsules? When autopsies were finally performed, after several delays due to local lab limitations, the results added more confusion than clarity. No toxic substances were detected in the decomposed bodies, though the long delay made accurate testing nearly impossible. That's when the speculation began. Some investigators leaned toward a misguided spiritual ritual, believing the men had ingested a hallucinogen or sedative and died waiting for a vision or a signal that never came. Others believed it was a suicide pact gone wrong, but not everyone agreed. Neighbors and friends testified that Miguel and Manuel had been attempting to contact extraterrestrial beings through psychic energy and light phenomena. They had in fact performed similar rituals before, often climbing remote areas and waiting for the light. One of their associates claimed the men had previously built lead masks during earlier experiments meant to protect their eyes from blinding flashes caused by otherworldly contact. This wasn't a one-off event. It was part of a pattern. But the more details emerged, the less sense it made. Why didn't they tell anyone where they were going? Why bring only the bare essentials? Why lead masks instead of goggles or glasses? Why such precise timing, and who or what was meant to send the signal? Police examined the area for clues. There were no tire tracks, no signs of third parties, no weapons, no campfire, and no signs of foul play. The only abnormality? A nearby patch of scorched grass, slightly darker than the rest, as if something hot or radioactive had briefly touched down. No samples were taken, no photos were filed, just another oddity logged and forgotten. As news of the case spread, it spiraled into urban legend. Locals whispered about UFO sightings on that very hill during the same week. Radio shows picked up the story. Paranormal investigators flooded Nitaro, swearing the men had made contact and paid the price. Journalists gave the case its lasting nickname, the lead masks mystery. Yet, the deeper police dug, the more the facts remained slippery. The men were not drug addicts. They had families. They had plans. There was no financial incentive, no insurance policy, no cult pressures, no evidence of coercion. All they left behind were questions and a handwritten note, like a riddle scrawled just before the final curtain. Could they have been misled by someone? Was there a third party who supplied the capsules and convinced them a signal would arrive? Or were they true believers, caught in a delusion so deep they orchestrated their own deaths as a form of ascension? Or was it something stranger still? One theory, never confirmed but forever lingering, suggests that what happened on Morro do Vintem was a failed experiment, not in science but in faith, that somewhere between technology and transcendence, Miguel and Manuel had stepped into a belief system too unstable to survive, and whatever they were waiting for on that hill never came. Not visibly, at least. To understand the mystery on Morro do Vintém, you must first understand the minds that walked willingly into it. Miguel José Viana and Manuel Pereira de Cruz were not uneducated drifters or reckless thrill-seekers. They were trained electronic technicians, methodical thinkers, tinkerers, men who understood the logic of circuits and the flow of power. They worked together in Campos dos Goitacazes, a quiet city not far from Rio de Janeiro. Friends and family described them as mild-mannered, devout and loyal, but beneath that ordinary surface lived a fascination that veered far beyond scientific curiosity. They were deeply involved in spiritist experimentation, a blend of science, mysticism, and occult belief that blurred the boundaries between this world and the next. In Brazil during the 1960s, Spiritism was not fringe. It had cultural roots going back to the writings of Allan Kardec, who taught that spirits were real, contactable, and could guide the living through carefully conducted rituals. But Miguel and Manuel took things further. They weren't content to passively wait for messages from the beyond. They were experimenting, actively trying to engineer encounters, using tools from their trade radios, coils, circuits, and eventually lead. The men were part of a small group of like-minded experimenters, some of whom would later speak to police in hushed tones. These sessions, according to surviving members, included trance-like meditations, magnetism rituals, and mental communications intended to contact extraterrestrial intelligence. This wasn't about summoning the dead in candlelit seances. It was about connecting with something beyond human, entities they believed could share energy, knowledge, or perhaps even transcendence. Lead, in their minds, had symbolic and practical uses. It was considered a protective material, shielding them from electromagnetic interference, or more importantly, from the light they believed came from these otherworldly contacts. The lead masks were handmade, crude in design but purposeful. This wasn't some theatrical prop. These were functional talismans, built by men who truly believed their eyes needed shielding, not from the sun but from radiant forces beyond comprehension. In the weeks before their deaths, Miguel and Manuel began making plans in secret. On August 12th, they told their families they were going on a business trip to São Paulo, but they never made it past Niterói. In truth, they had been conducting dry runs for something bigger. Their acquaintances admitted that similar trips had happened before, unsuccessful attempts to make contact. But this time felt different. They had packed with precision. They carried 2 towels, which might have been intended as insulation, or to lie on during the ritual. They brought a plastic water bottle, as if they expected a short delay, not a survival kit, not a weapon, not even extra clothing, just the essentials for something brief, timed, and irreversible. What really pushed this moment into action? That remains the puzzle. According to investigators, Miguel had become increasingly absorbed in the idea that a transformative encounter was near, that he and Manuel had received a signal or message from their spiritual network, A witness named Elcio Gomes, a fellow technician and spiritism enthusiast, claimed that in prior sessions they had seen lights and heard instructions during meditative states. Elcio, however, backed out of this particular experiment. He claimed he sensed something off about it. Others weren't so quick to speak, either due to fear or guilt. One theory suggests that Miguel and Manuel were experimenting with LSD or mescaline hallucinogens that were rare but not unheard of in underground Brazilian circles at the time, but neither had a history of drug use, and no trace of such substances was found. Still, the cryptic note, "Take capsules after the effect," hints at some kind of preparation or altered state, a sequence of steps to follow once a particular phase began. That's the kind of structure one sees in either spiritual initiation or chemical experiments. And yet, it is that notebook, that single page of instructions, that reveals the most about their inner world. The language is disturbingly calm. It reads less like a suicide note and more like a procedural checklist. 16:30 be at the agreed place. 18:30 ingest capsules. After effect protect metals. Await signal mask. No emotion, no farewell, just an outline, a script. There's something chilling in that simplicity. It suggests belief, absolute belief, that what they were doing was rational, necessary, and meaningful. Perhaps they believed they wouldn't die at all, that whatever was coming would elevate them, or open their minds to something divine. But if they were wrong, the result was what police found on that hillside: silence, decay, and two bodies face up to the sky. Still, their community remained divided. Some called them martyrs, pioneers of a science not yet understood. Others whispered of darker forces, that perhaps they had been manipulated, either by a spiritual leader or by one of their own, who wanted to test the limits of belief. One suggestion that has lingered for decades is that a third person was involved, someone who prepared the capsules, someone who stayed behind, someone who may have watched. If that's true, then the lead masks weren't just protection, they were blindfolds, and the hill wasn't just a site of contact, it was a stage. In later years, amateur investigators and journalists would track down surviving members of the group. Some refused to speak. Others denied everything. A few broke down in tears, calling what happened a mistake, a miscalculation, or worse, a betrayal. But no one, not even Elcio, could say what the capsules contained. No one admitted to writing the note, and no one, it seems, was willing to say what they thought the signal truly was. Still, the belief lingered, not just among the dead, but the living, that something had called those men to that hill, and whatever it was, it required lead masks, empty hands, and total trust. Blind trust. August 17th, 1966. The day Miguel and Manuel disappeared began like any other. They left their homes in Campos dos Goitacazes with a simple explanation. They were going to buy materials for work, including a used car and some electronic components. It was a small errand, or so it seemed, but their families would never see them alive again. They boarded a bus to Niterói, a coastal city across the bay from Rio de Janeiro. Witnesses later confirmed that they carried a large sum of money, more than needed for any simple purchase, but their journey was quiet. No commotion, no strange behavior. What stood out, in hindsight, was what they packed, and what they didn't. The men brought 2 waterproof raincoats. Despite no forecast for rain, they carried a plastic water bottle, 2 white towels, and a screwdriver. The most haunting of their possessions, the lead masks, were likely packed with great care. Their weight alone would have made them difficult to carry unnoticed, and yet they moved through the city unnoticed, like any other pair of traveling tradesmen. After arriving in Niterói that afternoon, the men checked in at a small bar and convenience shop near the base of Morro do Vintém, a steep hill known more for its radio towers and occasional hikers than for anything mystical. There, they purchased the now infamous bottle of water. The bartender remembered them as anxious. Miguel kept checking his watch. Manuel looked distracted. When asked if they wanted anything else, they declined, and then they left, headed straight for the hill, according to multiple witnesses. But this is where the story darkens. Morro do Vintém is not an easy climb, especially not in formal wear and under a hot sun. It would have taken nearly an hour to reach the upper slope on foot. The terrain is thick with brush, riddled with insects, and known for sudden drops and loose soil. And yet, neither man was dressed for hiking. There were no backpacks, no flashlights, no food, just the bare minimum, as if they expected to return quickly or not at all. Investigators later traced their likely path. Based on the time of their arrival and the purchase timestamp of the water, the men would have begun ascending around 4:15 p.m. That lines up almost exactly with the first line of their note, "Be at the place at 16:30. It seems they had a scheduled appointment, though with what or whom remains a mystery. Several things about their positioning on the hill have baffled detectives and paranormal investigators alike. The bodies were placed side by side, with their backs against a natural incline. The raincoats were still on. Their hands were resting at their sides, not clenched or defensive. There were no signs of struggle, no drag marks, no evidence that anyone else had touched them. It was as if they had sat down and waited for a signal, a flash, a visitor, and then nothing. One theory suggests that the men took sedatives or some kind of psychoactive substance that caused unconsciousness, leading to death through exposure or cardiac arrest. But the autopsies, though delayed and imperfect, found no toxic agents in the decomposed remains. If they took something, it was either undetectable or had long since faded by the time their bodies were found 3 days later. The presence of lead masks adds another layer of confusion. These weren't standard-issue welding visors or sun shields. They were specially cut, handcrafted pieces, made to block out light entirely. No eye holes, no straps, just heavy slabs meant to cover the eyes. But why cover their eyes after death, unless the masks were meant to be worn before or during a specific event? Some believe they were protecting themselves from a bright flash, perhaps from a craft descending, or a burst of spiritual energy. Others argue that the masks were symbolic, ritual items designed to guide their spirits during an out-of-body experience. If they were expecting to ascend, transform or make contact, the lead masks may have been a form of psychic armor. But what happened during those final moments? No one saw them climb. No one heard a scream. The boy who found them days later said the area was eerily quiet. Birds chirped, insects hummed, but the air felt strange. Local reports surfaced of a bright light in the sky over Nitoro that night, but no official confirmation followed. That alone fueled UFO theories for decades. More grounded investigators suspect that Miguel and Manuel simply miscalculated. Perhaps they had tried a hallucinogen in a prior session, and this time took a stronger dose. Perhaps they believed they would receive instructions from a spiritual contact or telepathic voice, and sat waiting. When nothing happened, when the signal didn't come, they passed out, one after the other. But others question why both men would die simultaneously, in identical positions. What are the odds that both would expire at the same moment, showing no physical reaction? If one died first, why didn't the other panic, seek help, or run? Why weren't there signs of desperation? Why didn't anyone in the area hear cries, coughing, or commotion? The answer, chillingly, might be that they died exactly as planned. Whether by ritual or by belief, the men may have willed themselves into silence, resigned to an outcome they believed would lead them elsewhere. In that case, the hill was not a mistake. It was a chosen altar, a place to meet something beyond this world, something worth preparing for with towels, water, and lead masks. And if they were wrong, then their journey was the final act in a story of delusion. But if they were right, even slightly, then perhaps something did arrive on that hilltop, something that left no trace but a chill in the trees, and two bodies perfectly arranged, staring skyward through eyes that would never open again. Among the few personal items recovered near the bodies of Miguel and Manuel, the notebook stood out the most. It wasn't buried, it wasn't hidden, it was just there, resting near the corpses on the grassy slope of Morro do Vintem, as if waiting to be read. The notebook wasn't set full, just a few pages with writing. But one page in particular stopped investigators cold. Scribbled in Portuguese, the message read, 16:30 be at the determined place. 18:30 ingest capsules. After effect protect metals wait for mask signal. It wasn't a suicide note. It wasn't a confession. It wasn't even a goodbye. It was a checklist, eerie in its clinical structure, like a lab manual for an experiment conducted outside time and reason. Who wrote it? Most believe Miguel did. His handwriting matched entries on the previous page, which contained mundane records of expenses and electronic parts. But the tone of this message was entirely different. This wasn't about buying radio tubes or repairing amplifiers. This was about preparation, sequence, and something that required faith. Let's break it down, line by line. 16:30 be at the determined place. They arrived on the hill right around this time. This implies they had a rendezvous, either with someone else, or something else. The precision of the timing suggests that what was expected wasn't random. Perhaps they believed a craft or spiritual force would appear at exactly that hour, a cosmic appointment. 1830 ingest capsules. This is the most terrifying line. The timing shows they waited for 2 full hours before taking whatever they had brought with them. The note does not say what the capsules were, just that they were to be ingested. No dosage, no brand, no side effects listed. If it was a sedative, a hallucinogen, or a poison, it went unidentified in the autopsy. What makes this even more puzzling is the delay. Why wait 2 hours? One possibility, they believed the arrival or signal would trigger a transformation, and the capsules were meant to facilitate that event. If so, the delay was intentional. They were waiting for the right moment. After effect protect metals. What metals? Their tools, their watches, radios. This line stumps everyone. It's unclear whether they were protecting metals from an external force, or shielding themselves from radiation, or spiritual contamination. Some theorists believe the men thought their physical bodies or their devices would be affected by energy or light. Others argue this is symbolic, protecting the soul's weight, metaphorically described as metal. Or perhaps they simply believed certain metals carried sacred charge and had to be guarded during contact. The problem is, no such metals were found near them. No copper coils, no iron relics, no spiritual talismans. If they brought metals to protect, they vanished, or were never real. Await signal mask. The phrase is cryptic. Is mask the subject of the sentence, or the object? Were they waiting for a signal to put the masks on, or were they awaiting a signal from the mask itself, some kind of sensory trigger that would activate once they'd ingested the capsules? The lack of punctuation adds to the mystery. Maybe it was a translation error. Maybe it was deliberately written this way to mimic a mantra, a phrase chanted internally. Await, signal, mask. Whatever the interpretation, it's clear that the masks played a crucial role in the ritual. They weren't afterthoughts. They were tools, perhaps even keys. The notebook, for all its haunting vagueness, does offer one certainty. They believed in a process. This wasn't spontaneous or careless. There was an order. There was preparation. There were steps. And that means they expected something to happen. That's what truly unsettled the police. This wasn't an accident. These men had organized their deaths, or more disturbingly, had organized their transformation. Investigators followed leads based on the notebook's contents. They examined the handwriting for any signs of coercion. None. They explored chemical labs to identify the capsules, but without samples, it was a dead end. No matching prescriptions were found in their homes. No known spiritual compound was traced to their group, and no surviving member of their circle admitted to preparing such capsules. This raises the possibility of a third party, someone who wrote the note, gave them the capsules, and instructed them in the procedure. If so, this person vanished without a trace, or chose to remain hidden. But others believe the notebook is more than a list. It's a ritual script. In spiritist traditions, and many esoteric belief systems, initiates are often given precise instructions to follow during contact with higher planes. Meditation, fasting, mantra, timing. Each element is part of a structured interface between the physical and metaphysical. For Miguel and Manuel, this notebook may have been their interface. And yet, the notebook also reads like a warning. It does not mention what will happen. It does not explain the purpose of the masks. It assumes knowledge, perhaps passed down orally, or through coded language shared only within their circle. If the men believed this was their initiation into a new consciousness, the notebook was simply their doorway. But the door never opened. What we're left with is a fragment of a language we don't fully understand, a language that straddles science and mysticism, rational structure and irrational faith. One grim theory suggests that the notebook was a trap, that someone manipulated these men, knowing their hunger for contact, and fed them a false ritual, a dose of something lethal, a time, a place, a lie. The notebook becomes in this view a weapon disguised as hope. But that's not how the men saw it. For Miguel and Manuel, the notebook was a map. They followed its steps with conviction. From the precise timing to the location to the ingestion of capsules, each moment was scripted. And that's what makes the lead mask's case not just mysterious but tragic. Because for all its madness, the notebook is a mirror, a reflection of how far some will go to find meaning, to seek connection, to believe that if you climb a hill at just the right time, with just the right tools, you might find the answer you've been chasing your whole life. Even if it kills you. When the bodies of Miguel José Viana and Manuel Pereira da Cruz were finally removed from the slopes of Morro do Vintém, the clock had already been ticking for 3 full days. It was August in Brazil, humid, hot, and unrelenting. Their remains, exposed to the elements and the insects, had already begun to decompose. By the time the coroner received them, critical evidence was lost forever. And with that loss came a ripple effect that continues to fuel conspiracy theories to this day. The local forensic facility in Niterói was ill-equipped to handle a case of this strangeness or scope. They lacked the modern technology to conduct thorough toxicological testing, especially on bodies that had already begun to break down. Brazil in the 1960s, particularly outside major cities, faced many infrastructure limitations. Labs were underfunded, equipment was aging, and procedures were inconsistent. And in this case, the result was disastrous. The autopsy reports listed the cause of death as inconclusive. No visible wounds, no external trauma, no evidence of heart attacks, suffocation, or blunt force. The men had not drowned, nor been poisoned, at least, not in any way that could be detected. And yet, they were dead, peacefully positioned, almost reverently placed. Something had happened on that hill. Something undetectable. Officials did manage to confirm a few things. Both men were healthy before their deaths. No signs of malnutrition, illness or injury. Their organs were mostly intact, though in a state of decomposition. The only peculiar detail noted in the report was that there were no clear signs of convulsions, vomiting or bodily distress, common indicators of toxic ingestion. If they took a powerful sedative or hallucinogen, they did not fight it. They did not resist. They simply faded. This peacefulness is key. It adds weight to the theory that they either died in a meditative state under the influence of a hypnotic drug, or, more chillingly, that they were already unconscious when the final event occurred. But here's where the real problem lies. No toxicological analysis was completed in time. The delay in retrieving and processing the bodies was blamed on logistics. Authorities said the hill was hard to access. The weather slowed them down, and local law enforcement didn't initially grasp the seriousness of the scene. Some even speculated that the initial response team assumed it was a drug overdose or suicide pact, and didn't prioritize forensic preservation. Whatever the cause, the consequences were irreversible. No blood samples were preserved, no gastric contents tested. By the time experts realized what they were dealing with, the bodies were too far gone for accurate testing. A golden window of truth. 48 to 72 hours had closed, and with it, the most important questions about the case. What were the capsules? Did they die of overdose, poisoning, or shock? Was their death intentional, or a mistake? No answers, just educated guesses. And so, like the note and the masks, the autopsy became another half-clue in a story full of broken threads. There were more failures. Investigators never properly documented the scorched patch of ground near the bodies, a darkened ring of soil that some witnesses claimed looked burned, as if something had landed there briefly. No soil samples were taken, no radiation testing conducted. The area was never sealed off. That patch, which might have held answers, was eventually overgrown and lost. The lead masks, too, were poorly analyzed. Despite their uniqueness, they were treated more like novelty items than forensic evidence. Fingerprint tests were never completed. No metallurgical analysis was ordered to determine if the lead had been exposed to heat, pressure, or chemical alteration. The towels found near the bodies were tested for DNA, but cross-contamination in the lab rendered the results useless. Some fibers were burned and discarded. Perhaps the most tragic oversight was the failure to investigate potential third-party involvement. Several witnesses near the base of the hill reported seeing a third man walking with Miguel and Manuel as they climbed. Descriptions were vague. A tall man in a dark shirt, carrying something wrapped in cloth. Police interviewed several locals, but no solid identification was ever made. No composite sketch was drawn. That third man, if he existed, vanished into the story like smoke. And yet, decades later, many believe he holds the key. Was he the one who supplied the capsules? Was he a guide, or a manipulator? Was he a fellow believer who lost his nerve, or something more sinister? We'll likely never know. Because the investigation, much like the autopsy, was allowed to fade. Not because of malicious intent necessarily, but because the case didn't fit into any familiar box. It wasn't murder. It wasn't robbery. There was no political motive, no clear crime. And so, it was quietly shelved, labeled unsolved, and passed off to folklore. But the people closest to the victims never accepted that. Their families, to this day, argue that foul play was involved, that Miguel and Manuel were targeted, manipulated, or used, that the men were intelligent and methodical, incapable of such reckless action without some kind of outside influence. Some relatives even believe they were experimented on, possibly by an underground organization interested in parapsychology or mind control. In recent years, digital sleuths have taken up the case, poring through newspaper archives, autopsy records, and crime scene photos. They've used AI tools to analyze handwriting, enhance images, and even simulate possible toxicological profiles based on what little evidence remains. But in the end, all of these efforts point back to the same dark truth. We'll never know what happened, because the tools meant to tell us were too late, too flawed, or never used at all. And maybe that's the most haunting part of the lead masks case. Not just what we don't know, but what we'll never be able to recover. Because in a case where two men climbed a hill looking for answers beyond our world, the real tragedy may be that the people meant to find the truth on this one never truly climbed after them. For many, the deaths of Miguel and Manuel could be explained by human error, spiritual delusion, or chemical miscalculation. But for others, especially those living near Morro do Vintem at the time, there was no doubt something unexplainable had come from the sky. In the days surrounding August 17th, 1966, the day the two men disappeared, multiple residents of Niterói and the nearby cities of São Gonçalo and Itabori reported sightings of strange lights in the sky, not airplanes, not meteors, but glowing orbs, pulsing in unnatural colors, bluish-white, fiery orange, sometimes hovering motionless, then shooting off at impossible speeds. One witness, a local woman named Maria de Conceição, claimed to have seen a bright circular light above Morro do Vintem the night the men vanished. She described it as silent, spinning, and casting a pale blue beam downward onto the hill. She wasn't alone. Her neighbors had seen it too, though many didn't speak publicly at the time out of fear of ridicule. After all, this was the mid-60s, and UFO fever was spreading like wildfire across the globe. Brazil, in particular, had become a hotspot for unexplained aerial phenomena. From the jungles of the Amazon to the beaches of São Paulo, locals had been reporting strange flying crafts for decades. Government officials denied everything, but quietly, Brazil's military was keeping track. A secretive project later revealed as Operação Prato, Operation Saucer, would eventually confirm that the Brazilian Air Force had opened numerous official investigations into UFO sightings, especially in the late 60s and 70s. The events on Morro do Vintem occurred just before these investigations became public, but they fit the pattern almost perfectly. Let's examine the timeline. Miguel and Manuel arrive in Niterói in the early afternoon. They climb the hill at approximately 4:30 p.m., according to the note. By 6:30 p.m., if the instructions were followed, they ingest the capsules. That same evening, residents report seeing a bright light hovering over the hill. Coincidence? Or convergence? Some UFO researchers believe the men were attempting intentional contact, not through radar or radios, but through psychic resonance, meditation and ritual timing. This wasn't unheard of. A number of fringe groups in the 1950s and 60s believed that telepathic messages could be sent to extraterrestrial beings, who would then appear at a designated time and location. These ideas were inspired by figures like George Adamski, who claimed to have met aliens in the California desert through similar methods. Miguel and Manuel were part of a spiritist group, but records suggest they also had connections to ufology circles, both through correspondence and through books found in their homes. Titles like The Cosmic Light, Science and Flying Saucers, and Contact Beyond Earth were noted by investigators. These were not passive interests. The men were immersed in a belief system that merged science fiction, spirituality, and experimental science. If they believed contact was possible, the lead masks make a strange kind of sense. In UFO lore, some alien encounters are said to involve intense light, sometimes described as blinding or paralyzing. Witnesses of alleged abductions often claim they were unable to move or speak once the light enveloped them. If Miguel and Manuel were trying to witness an arrival without being incapacitated, the masks could have been a practical precaution or a ritualistic one. But this theory opens darker possibilities. If something did arrive, what happened next? Were the men taken, then returned, dead? Did they see something that shattered their minds or biology? Was the capsule ingestion part of the preparation for interdimensional travel? Or worse, were the capsules planted, given to them as part of a test? Some even theorize that Miguel and Manel were experimented on, not by aliens, but by humans pretending to be aliens, part of a mind control or parapsychology experiment. It sounds far-fetched, until you consider that 1966 was the height of global Cold War experimentation, and several governments, including the US and Soviet Union, were actively exploring psyops, telepathy, and altered consciousness for military purposes. Could these men have been test subjects? Could the notebook be a planted instruction sheet, and the masks props for something far more calculated? We don't know, but the sightings that night are documented, corroborated, and never explained. And it didn't stop there. In the weeks after the bodies were discovered, more reports of strange lights, unexplained beacons, and nocturnal humming sounds flooded into local police stations. At least one resident claimed he had seen two men walking into the light near the hill a few days earlier, but that claim was dismissed as fantasy. Even so, Brazil's national press picked up the story, and suddenly, the lead masks case was linked to extraterrestrial theories across Latin America. The case appeared in tabloids and serious journals alike. Paranormal investigators flew in from the US, France, and Argentina. Some called the men victims of alien contact. Others said they were misguided prophets, but no one could explain the strange blue light hovering above that hill. To this day, UFOlogists refer to the case as one of the most compelling, unexplained deaths linked to possible contact. Because unlike most alien sightings, this one left bodies. Not just stories, not just photos, but two men, prepared for something monumental, found lying face up on a hill, as if they had been watching the sky right until the end. For all the focus on the lead masks, the capsules, and the cryptic note, one of the strangest and most overlooked elements of the lead masks case is this. There may have been a third man, someone who wasn't found on the hill, someone who didn't die, someone who might have been the orchestrator, or the only survivor. The theory of a third man didn't emerge from thin air. It came from eyewitnesses. Several people, including the bartender who sold the water bottle, claimed to have seen three men, not two, walk into his shop. One of them, possibly Miguel, did most of the talking. The other two stood silently, nervously watching the street. When asked about their destination, the men said they were headed to a special meeting. They left quickly, but not in a hurry, more like they were on a schedule. But here's the issue. Only two men climbed the hill, at least according to what police later pieced together. At no point did searchers or investigators locate any third body, backpack, or belongings on the trail, or at the site. There was no third raincoat, no third mask. Yet the witnesses insist there was someone else with them that day. Who was he? One possible answer lies with Elcio Gomes, a fellow technician and member of their spiritist group. Elcio had participated in earlier experiments with Miguel and Manuel. He admitted under police questioning that the group often met to practice mental contact rituals with spiritual or alien entities. They would enter meditative trances, use crystals or copper coils to focus energy, and attempt to channel messages. Elcio also confirmed that the lead masks had been used in previous experiments, and that this particular trip had been planned in advance, but he said he refused to go with them. He claimed he had a bad feeling, and that the others were taking things too far this time. That might have been the end of it. Except that Elcio knew more than he should have. He described the hill, the timing, the ritual sequence, even details about the note, before it was publicly released. When police asked him how he knew these things, he gave vague answers. They told me, we talked about it before, but no one could confirm those conversations had taken place. Some investigators believed Elcio was lying, that he wasn't just a fellow believer, but perhaps the one who supplied the capsules, or even the author of the notebook's instructions. He had motive, curiosity maybe, or a desire to push the ritual further than the others were willing. Or worse, he wanted to see what would happen if someone else followed the instructions to the letter. But there was no physical evidence linking him to the scene. No fingerprints, no receipts. And so Elcio was released. He returned to his life, and reportedly never spoke of the case again. But his name still lingers in UFO forums and conspiracy threads, whispered as the man who might have watched from the trees as two of his friends climbed into the unknown. Of course, Elcio wasn't the only candidate. Another theory points to a stranger, an outsider who latched onto the group, perhaps posing as a fellow seeker. Someone who introduced himself with knowledge of spiritism, UFOs, and cosmic rituals. Someone charismatic, persuasive, a kind of cult recruiter. If such a person existed, they could have easily fed the group just enough material to seem credible. Rituals, light theories, pseudo-scientific instructions, then vanished. It wouldn't be the first time a small, idealistic group was infiltrated by someone with darker intentions. This mysterious third man could have been the supplier of the capsules. If Miguel and Manuel didn't have access to the right chemicals or hallucinogens, they may have relied on this outsider to provide them, under the impression that the substances were safe, useful, or sacred. In this version of the story, the third man doesn't join them on the hill. He watches, waits, makes sure they carry out the steps, then leaves. And if you believe that theory, the crime isn't suicide, it's manipulated death. Some even argue that the third man is the only rational explanation for how everything was carried out so precisely. The positioning of the bodies, the lack of struggle, the timing. Perhaps Miguel and Manuel were drugged before they ever reached the hill. Perhaps the third man walked them up the slope, already sedated, and laid them down, covered their eyes, left the note, and disappeared. Of course, that requires believing in a premeditated murder with no motive, no witness, and no benefit. Unless, that is, the motive was experimentation to test how far belief can go, or in a more fringe interpretation, to conduct a human ritual for contact with extraterrestrial beings. There's one more theory, whispered among UFOlogists and paranormal researchers alike. It's the most unsettling of all. That the third man wasn't set human. That the entity they were preparing to meet did arrive, and that it did more than observe, that something was there on the hill that night, and only 2 of the 3 were taken, that the third man people saw wasn't part of the plan, it was the plan, and that Miguel and Manuel were, knowingly or not, part of a transaction. That theory, of course, lives in the realm of speculation, but so does everything in this case, because what we're left with isn't just a mystery, it's an absence, a space where something should be, a confession, a toxicology report, a motive, a name, but all we have is a quiet hill, 2 dead men, and the suggestion that someone else was there, someone who walked down that hill alive and never spoke again. The deaths of Miguel and Manuel weren't the first strange ones in Brazil's history, and they wouldn't be the last. In fact, the lead masks case fits into a disturbing pattern that has haunted Brazil for decades, a string of deaths involving unexplained circumstances, strange objects, and sometimes lead masks. Long before conspiracy theorists took hold of the story, local journalists and investigators began comparing the Morro do Vintém case to other unsolved deaths. Their goal was simple: was this a one-time anomaly, or part of a larger, more terrifying phenomenon? One case that stood out happened in 1962, just 4 years before the lead masks mystery. In the small city of Neves, a technician named Herminio Ribeiro was found dead in his home under bizarre circumstances. He had left notes describing a great light he expected to witness, along with preparations to shield the body during contact. He too was wearing a makeshift eye covering, though not made of lead. Authorities ruled it as suicide, but the details eerily mirrored those found in Miguel and Manuel's ritual: timing, light, and shielding. Then came 1967, 1 year after the lead masks case. On a remote beach in Garapari, a young fisherman discovered a man's body laid out with 2 towels, a plastic bottle, and what appeared to be a scorched area nearby. The man had no ID, and his eyes were covered with pieces of thick tinted glass, fastened crudely with electrical tape. Again, no trauma, no cause of death, and no answers. These weren't set urban legends. They were real, documented cases. Police files existed. Coroners signed off on inconclusive reports. And in each case there was some combination of the following: mysterious notes, eye coverings, or masks, isolated outdoor settings, no signs of struggle or injury, possible references to light, capsules, or arrival. And in each case, the trail went cold. Brazil, like many countries during the Cold War, was a hotbed of experimental science and occult crossovers. The tension between spiritualism and technology created space for fringe belief systems, pockets of people who believed they were on the edge of discovering new forms of communication, energy, or consciousness. Many of them worked in technical trades: radio operators, electrical engineers, ham radio enthusiasts. These weren't uneducated mystics. They were curious, clever minds chasing something uncharted. It's in that context that the lead masks start to make more sense. Not as props of delusion, but as tools. Tools meant to interact with something they believed was just beyond the veil. Investigators also explored whether there were secret groups operating in Brazil at the time, perhaps cults or spiritual collectives who encouraged these rituals. In 1966, several underground spiritist circles were discovered to be running experiments with magnetic fields, drugs, and sensory deprivation, often citing extraterrestrial contact or vibrational ascension. One group in Minas Gerais was shut down after a member died during an initiation, though no charges were filed. Then there were the rumors of government involvement. Declassified documents from Brazil's Operação Prato, Operation Saucer, a military operation in the late 1970s investigating UFO phenomena in the Amazon, revealed that top military officials were taking these sightings seriously. The documents, released decades later, detailed hundreds of witness reports, photographs, and testimonies from soldiers and civilians alike, many involving beams of light, faint humming sounds, and temporary paralysis, exactly the sort of thing Miguel and Manuel seemed to be preparing for. Although Operation Saucer occurred 10 years after the lead masks case, many theorists argue that it validated the fears and beliefs that men like Miguel and Manuel were acting upon, that something had been present in Brazil for years, unseen, unacknowledged, but persistent. Another curious detail from the Morro do Vintém investigation: the scorched patch of earth near the bodies. While never officially tested, multiple witnesses and first responders noted its presence: darkened soil, grass shriveled in a perfect circle. A heat source had touched down, briefly and with purpose. No one tested it, no one photographed it, but for those who believed it was all the confirmation they needed. That pattern of scorched earth, too, would appear in other unexplained deaths across Brazil. In 1973, a farmer in Paraná was found face-up in a cornfield, eyes covered, no wounds. A large burned ring was discovered nearby. Investigators ruled it exposure, but no evidence of hypothermia or heat stroke was found. So the question remains, were these isolated acts of delusion, or was there a network, even an unspoken one, of individuals who believed something was coming? The repetition of symbols, masks, light, timing, capsules, suggests more than coincidence. Either the individuals were sharing ideas in secret circles, or they were all responding to similar experiences, dreams, visions, lights in the sky. And if that sits true, what were those lights? Aerial phenomena? Secret experiments? Or something else entirely? The Brazil of the 1960s and 70s was a place of contradictions, deeply religious yet spiritually experimental, politically unstable yet bureaucratically rigid, open skies, ancient land, and a culture steeped in both science and superstition. It's not surprising that it became a kind of magnet for those seeking answers beyond the visible. But unlike cults or ideologies that flourish through numbers, the people in these cases, Miguel, Manuel, Herminio, the unknown man on the beach, acted alone or in pairs, as if drawn to the same signal, but unaware of one another, like individuals hearing the same transmission, and following it up their own lonely hills. And when they reached the top, some left behind only rituals, clues, and silence. Because the truth is, the lead masks case isn't just a story of two men. It's a node in a much larger network of mysteries, a pattern etched across time, hidden in notebooks, scorched grass, and the unspeaking dead. Since the discovery of Miguel and Manuel's bodies on Morro do Vintém, investigators, scientists, skeptics, spiritualists, and conspiracy theorists have all tried to answer the same question: what really happened? And while there is no single explanation that satisfies every detail, there are several competing theories, each one drawing a different shape around the same haunting outline. Let's start with the most grounded interpretation. 1. The misguided experiment theory. This theory posits that the men were attempting to conduct a controlled spiritual experiment, possibly involving hallucinogenic substances, with the goal of making contact with spiritual or extraterrestrial forces. According to this view, Miguel and Manuel may have prepared a ritual, masks, timing, capsules, as part of an experience they believed would lead to enlightenment or transformation. In this scenario, the capsules were either improperly dosed, or the men were unaware of their lethality. They died of overdose or respiratory depression, perhaps exacerbated by dehydration, exposure, or heat stroke. Their deaths were not suicidal in intent, but the unintended consequence of poorly understood experimentation. The problem? No trace of drugs was found in the autopsies. The bodies were too decomposed for accuracy. Yes, but without toxicological proof, This theory remains plausible, not proven. 2. The hoax gone wrong theory. This hypothesis suggests that someone, possibly a fellow member of their spiritualist group, deliberately misled them. This third man, as explored earlier, could have provided the capsules and instructions under the guise of a ritual or scientific procedure. Miguel and Manuel may have been victims of manipulation, following orders with the faith that something wondrous would occur. This theory would explain the cryptic note and structured behavior. It also explains why no struggle was seen, because the men trusted whoever gave them the instructions. The flaw? There's no physical evidence of this third person, no DNA, no motive, just speculation built on circumstantial behavior. 3. The cult hypothesis. While there's no official record of the men belonging to a formal cult, their spiritist group shared many characteristics with esoteric secret societies. Closed meetings, rituals, meditations, symbolic items like lead masks, and an intense belief in forces beyond normal understanding. Could their deaths have been part of a ritual sacrifice or initiation gone wrong? Some believe so. They point to similar cases across Brazil involving masked deaths, symbolic positioning, and scorched ground. The idea is that a network of believers may have been pursuing light contact rituals, attempting psychic communication with otherworldly intelligences, and that these rituals sometimes ended in death. Again, no solid proof, no arrests, no confirmed structure. 4. The psychological delusion theory. This is the skeptic's favorite. According to psychologists who reviewed the case, the two men may have suffered from shared psychosis or folie à deux, a rare but real condition where two people, typically in close emotional or intellectual partnership, fall into a shared delusion. In this case, Miguel and Manuel could have built their belief system over time, reinforcing each other's perceptions. They were technicians, trained in electronics, a field that can sometimes breed obsession, especially when mixed with spiritual or metaphysical ideas. They may have convinced themselves they were chosen, or on the verge of discovery, and constructed a death ritual disguised as a scientific experiment. This theory accounts for their behavior, their calmness, their lack of panic, but it does not explain why other people in their circle reported similar beliefs, nor does it explain the UFO sightings, the burned soil, or the repeated symbols across unrelated deaths. 5. The UFO contact theory. To many, the most compelling theory is also the most speculative. That Miguel and Manuel were not just trying to make contact, they were successful. The lead masks, the note, the towels, the timing, it all aligns with contact ritual logic found in various UFO religions, both in Brazil and abroad. The idea is that a ship was expected to appear at 1630, and the capsules were meant to prepare their bodies for either ascension, transfer, or psychic communion. The men sat, waited, took the capsules, closed their eyes, awaited the signal. If something came, no one saw it. If nothing came, the silence itself became the answer. Some take this further, suggesting that the men may have been removed temporarily or permanently altered, and that the bodies found on the hill were merely shells, remnants of consciousness moved elsewhere. This theory moves past science and into metaphysics, but it persists for one reason: the case makes no sense otherwise. 6. The intelligence experiment hypothesis. A minority of theorists propose a darker, more terrestrial explanation, that the men were unknowing participants in a government or intelligence experiment, perhaps involving psychotropics, suggestion, or behavior control. Brazil, like the US and Soviet Union during the Cold War, was under pressure to explore non-conventional military assets. Could the capsules have been part of a trial? Were the instructions meant to test obedience or susceptibility? It's a provocative theory, but again, no documents, no confessions, no chain of command has ever surfaced. So where does that leave us? With a case that defies every box it's been placed in. It doesn't behave like a homicide. There's no motive, no struggle, no trauma. It doesn't behave like a suicide. There's planning but no despair, no notes to loved ones. It doesn't behave like a religious ritual. There's no scripture, no theology, no communal element. And it doesn't behave like a scientific experiment, because no known science accounts for lead masks, cryptic schedules, and pills awaiting signals. It is, in essence, a paradox, a real-life enigma, where the more you learn, the less you understand. That's why the lead masks case still haunts us, because it is not just about what happened. It's about what didn't happen, the missing signal, the unanswered questions, the truth that never arrived. They were two men in suits, carrying towels, a bottle of water, and slabs of lead. They left behind families, careers, and a notebook filled with instructions that have puzzled the world for over half a century. What began as an afternoon errand ended in death on a quiet Brazilian hillside. No wounds, no witnesses, no weapon, just stillness, mystery, silence, and those eyes forever hidden behind crude, homemade masks. The lead masks case remains one of the most bizarre, unsolved stories in modern history. Not because of the body count, not because of the violence, but because of its absence of chaos. The scene was too calm, too prepared, too deliberate, as if the men had rehearsed their own deaths. And maybe they had. In the decades since that August afternoon in 1966, investigators have come and gone, files have been reopened, revisited, archived, paranormal researchers have studied the note like a sacred text, psychologists have drafted theories about mass delusion, spiritual obsession, and cognitive loops. Ufologists have placed the incident among the top cases in Latin America, tying it to sightings and scorched earth. Journalists have written thousands of words trying to connect the fragments, each of them hoping to find that one overlooked piece that would finally snap everything into place. But the truth is, the more you look, the more it slips away. The men are dead. The masks are in a police evidence locker somewhere, probably forgotten. The soil is green again on Morro do Vintém, and the bartender who sold them water likely told the story 100 times before fading into memory himself. And yet, the case doesn't go away, because the real mystery isn't just what happened, it's why we still care. It's the way the case feels unfinished, like it was leading up to something. Like Miguel and Manuel were on the verge of an answer, most of us are still asking, what else is out there? What happens when we die? Can we reach across the void and touch something more? They believed the answer might lie in a light, in a signal, in a ritual precisely timed. They believed in a map that didn't lead to heaven or hell, but to somewhere else, beyond sight, beyond sound, maybe even beyond death. And whatever you believe about them, whether they were fools, victims, or seekers, you cannot deny their commitment. They followed their instructions to the letter, and in that, there is something unsettling, something noble, something tragic. Because their deaths weren't the result of chaos. They were the result of order, a checklist, a plan, a faith in something invisible. Maybe that's what makes this story feel so haunting. It's not that we can't solve it, it's that we don't even know what kind of story it is. Is it a cautionary tale, a psychological profile in shared delusion? Is it a spiritual fable about reaching too far, too fast? Is it a forgotten chapter in UFO history? Is it a crime that was never caught, or a ritual that was never completed? Or is it all of those at once? The legacy of the lead masks case is that it refuses to fit. It breaks the frameworks we try to place around it. It dares you to categorize it, and then slips out the back door while you try. It's not a murder mystery. It's not quite science fiction. It's not religion. It's not madness. It's a void shaped like two men and a notebook. And that sip's what keeps it alive. Because deep down, part of us wonders, if they were right, what did they see? And if they were wrong, why does it feel like they knew something we don't? Every few years, someone will bring the case back into the spotlight, a podcast, a YouTube documentary, a Reddit thread, a declassified document that never quite delivers. And each time, a new wave of curiosity follows. We search again, we speculate again, we stare at those black and white photos again. Two men in suits, lying on a hill with their eyes covered, as if shielding themselves from the thing they were most desperate to see. The irony is cruel. And perfect. Maybe that's the final twist. Not that we never solved the case, but that the case solved us. It revealed how deeply we fear the unknown, and yet how stubbornly we chase it. It showed us what happens when belief pushes past the edge of logic, when preparation becomes obsession, when silence becomes a kind of signal all its own. We don't know what happened on Morro do Vintém, maybe we never will. But the story isn't set really theirs anymore. It stips ours now. Two dead men, a notebook, lead masks, and the possibility, no matter how distant, that something was waiting for them on that hill. And that maybe, it still is.